The wind cut through the valley like a sharp blade, carrying flakes of snow that stung the skin. The river was half frozen, its surface a patchwork of white ice and dark, slow-moving water. He walked along the bank, his boots crunching in the frost, every breath making a small cloud in the cold air. This planet was cruel in winter, and it never forgave those who wandered too far from shelter. He was not looking for trouble, just checking his fishing lines. The river often gave him small meals, and today he hoped for something fresh. But then he heard a sound so faint. He almost thought it was the wind. It came again, thin and sharp. Like a cry, he froze, tilting his head. The sound wasn't human. It was lighter, trembling. Full of fear, he stepped closer to the river, scanning the mist that floated over the ice. At first, he saw nothing. Then, his eyes caught movement under the pale surface. Small hands pressed weakly against the ice from below. The shape of a tiny figure struggled in the freezing water. The glow of her eyes shone faintly. Almost swallowed by the dim light, without thinking, he dropped his fishing pole and ran. His boots slid on the ice as he knelt near the trapped figure. The girl's lips were moving, but the sound was muffled by water. He saw her face, small, alien, with delicate lines and skin so pale it almost looked like the snow around her. She pounded the ice with fading strength. He slammed his fist against the surface again and again until it cracked. Cold water splashed up, biting into his skin like knives. He reached in and grabbed her arm. The shock of the water made his fingers go numb instantly. But he pulled with all his strength. She was so light, too light for someone alive. He dragged her out onto the ice. She gasped, coughing water. Her body trembled violently. Her clothes, thin and torn, clung to her small frame. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close to share his warmth. "Breathe," he whispered. He whispered, his own breath shaking from the cold. Her glowing eyes blinked slowly, focusing on his face. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Don't. Let me go." The way she said it wasn't just fear. It was a plea, a need deeper than the moment. He held her tighter, feeling how fragile she was, like one wrong move could break her. He knew she couldn't survive out here long. He picked her up, her arms hanging limply around his neck. Her head rested on his shoulder, and he could feel her shallow breathing against his skin. The snow crunched under his boots as he hurried back toward his small shelter. The cold air bit at his face, but he ignored it. His focus was on the weight in his arms, not heavy, but somehow carrying the weight of a life depending on him. The wind howled louder, almost as if trying to pull them apart. When they reached the shelter, he kicked the door open and stepped inside. Warm air from the small heater wrapped around them. He set her gently on the bed and grabbed a thick blanket. Covering her completely, she shivered under it, her teeth chattering. Her glowing eyes followed him as he moved around the room, lighting the fire. He poured hot water into a cup and brought it to her lips. She drank slowly, as if each sip took all her effort. Her gaze never left him, not even for a second. It wasn't the look of a stranger meeting someone new. It was the look of someone who had already decided she belonged with him outside. The wind and river still made their sounds, but inside, there was only the crackle of fire and the slow rhythm of her breathing. She was safer now, but questions filled his mind. Who was she? Why was she alone in the freezing river? And what danger had left her in such a place? As she closed her eyes, still clutching the blanket tightly, he knew one thing. The moment he pulled her from the water, something had changed. He didn't just save a life, he had stepped into something bigger, something that might never let him go. The fire warmed the small shelter, shadows dancing across the walls. He sat beside the bed, watching the tiny alien girl wrapped tightly in the blanket. Her breathing had steadied, but every now and then, her small body shivered, even In the heat, he placed another log in the fire and glanced at her. Her glowing eyes were open again, watching him like he was the only solid thing in her world. She didn't speak at first, only stared, as if studying his face. Finally, in a soft, trembling voice, she said, "You saved me." He nodded slowly. "Yes." She hesitated, then added, "If you save me, you must be mine forever." The words caught him off guard. He smiled faintly, thinking it was just something a frightened child might say. "You don't have to worry. You're safe here," he said gently. But she shook her head, her expression serious. "No. Not just safe. Mine." Her gaze didn't waver. Her tone wasn't playful. It was as if she was speaking a rule, something ancient and unbreakable. He didn't understand it, but he could feel the weight behind her words. He poured more hot water into her cup and handed it to her. Her small hands cupped it carefully, as if it was a rare treasure. She took slow sips, her eyes still locked on him. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated, then whispered a name in a language he didn't fully understand. It sounded musical, soft, and strange. He repeated it the best he could, which made her lips twitch in the faintest smile. Outside, the wind slammed against the walls and the sound of distant movement carried through the night. It was faint, but he had lived out here long enough to know it wasn't the wind or the river. Someone or something was moving nearby. Her eyes flickered toward the sound, and suddenly she pulled the blanket tighter around herself. Her voice was lower now, almost fearful. "They will come," he frowned. "Who?" She didn't answer at first. Then she said, "The ones who owned me." The words made him still. He didn't ask right away, just listened as the fire crackled. She spoke in short sentences, halting, like each word was heavy. "They take small ones like me, work until no more work, then throw away." Anger rose inside him. He wanted to tell her that no one owned her now, but he knew words alone wouldn't make her believe it. "They will come," she repeated. "If they find me, I won't live." He leaned closer, his voice steady. "They won't take you." She stared at him, searching his face for any sign of doubt. "Promise," she whispered. He nodded. "I promise." Her shoulders relaxed slightly, as if the promise itself gave her strength. She reached out a small, trembling hand, and he took it. Her fingers were cold, but she held on to him with surprising force for someone so small. He stayed by her side as the night deepened. The noises outside came and went, but he didn't leave her. At one point, her eyes closed and her breathing slowed, but she didn't let go of his hand. As the hours passed, he realized her words from earlier still echoed in his mind. "You must be mine forever." It sounded strange, almost like a vow. He wondered if, in her culture, saving someone meant something more than just rescue. When dawn's pale light began to creep through the small window, she opened her eyes again. Her voice was quiet but firm. "Now you belong to me." He chuckled softly. "I thought I promised to keep you safe, not to belong to you." She tilted her head, her glowing eyes unreadable. "Same thing," she said, and turned her face back toward the fire. He didn't know if she was joking or telling the truth. The sound of footsteps outside made them both tense. This time, it was closer, heavier, deliberate. She looked at him with fear in her eyes, and he knew her hunters had found the trail. He stood, moving quietly to the door. The cold air rushed in when he opened it slightly. Through the drifting snow, he saw dark shapes moving between the trees. When he turned back, she was sitting up, her blanket still wrapped around her, but her small hands clenched into fists. "Don't give me to them," she said, almost like a command. "You have my word," he replied, and his voice carried no hesitation. He didn't know how he would keep that promise, but he knew breaking it wasn't an option. The firelight glowed against the walls as the figures outside drew nearer in that moment. He understood that saving her from the river had been only the first step. The real fight for her life, and maybe his, was about to begin. The sound of footsteps grew louder, steady and heavy, like boots pressing deep into the snow. He stood by the door, his eyes scanning the white haze outside. The dark shapes in the distance became clearer. 3 figures in armor, their outlines sharp against the pale landscape. They moved with purpose, spreading out as they approached. The girl's eyes followed him, wide with fear. She gripped the blanket tighter, her small frame trembling. He could almost hear her heartbeat in the quiet moments between the crunch of snow. When the first figure reached the shelter, it stopped just outside the doorway. The visor of its helmet reflected the pale light, hiding the eyes inside. The voice that came from it was cold and flat. "We're looking for something that belongs to us." He didn't move from his place. His hand rested on the edge of the door, blocking their view of the inside. "I don't think you'll find it here," he said evenly. The second figure stepped closer, a small female, pale skin, glowing eyes. She escaped from her worksite. Behind him, the girl made a faint sound. A small, sharp intake of breath. He knew they had heard it. The third figure tilted its head. "You have her." His stance didn't change, but his voice was firm. "No one belongs to you." The first figure let out a slow, deliberate laugh. "You don't understand, human. She is property. She carries a bond mark. Do you know what that means?" He glanced back at the girl, her eyes lowered, her hand rising to her neck where the faint glow of the mark shimmered in the firelight. She didn't speak, but he understood enough. This was why they wanted her so badly. The second figure stepped forward. "Give her back now, and we'll let you live." The words were simple, but the tone carried the promise of violence. The man's jaw tightened. "She's not going anywhere with you." For a long moment, no one moved. Snowflakes drifted between them, carried by the wind. Then the first figure's voice came again, lower this time. "You're making a dangerous choice, human. That mark means she is bound to you now. Our law says that's impossible. So we will take her, break the bond, and end her." The girl's grip on the blanket faltered, and she whispered, "Don't let them." He took a slow breath. "I won't." The leader gestured, and the 3 figures stepped back. "We'll be back," the first one said, "and when we return, there will be no choice left for you to make." They turned and disappeared into the white mist, their dark shapes fading into the trees. He closed the door quietly. The girl was staring at the fire, her shoulders tense. He sat beside her, and for a moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the fire crackling and the faint whistle of wind outside. "They'll come back," she said at last. Her voice was small, but the certainty in it was heavy. "Then we won't be here when they do," he replied. She looked at him, her glowing eyes reflecting the firelight. "You would leave your home for me?" He didn't answer right away. His home was the only safe place he had built for himself on this harsh world. But he had also seen the fear in her eyes. The way she had clung to him, the way she had said, "Don't let them." "Yes," he said finally, "I would." Her lips trembled as if she wanted to say something more. But instead, she just pulled the blanket tighter. He stood and began gathering supplies: food, water, spare clothes, a small blaster for protection. As he worked, she watched him silently. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes never left him. When he knelt to check the heater's portable fuel cells, she asked softly, "Do you know what it means to have the bond mark?" He shook his head. "Only that it makes them want you back." She nodded slowly. "It means you are mine, and I am yours. It is for life. They hate that it is you." The words lingered in the air between them, heavy with meaning. He still didn't fully understand. He didn't know what being hers meant in her world. But he knew enough to realize it was something those hunters wanted to erase when the supplies were ready. He opened the back door of the shelter. The wind rushed in, carrying the faint sound of distant movement again. They didn't have long. She stood, still wrapped in the blanket, and stepped toward him. Her small hand reached for his. They stepped out into the snow, leaving the shelter behind, the trees. Ahead loomed dark and silent. Each step took them deeper into the unknown. But at least they were moving away from the danger behind. Still, as the wind howled through the branches, he knew the hunters were not gone. They were patient, and they would follow. And when they found them again, he would be ready. The forest swallowed them quickly. The tall black trees stood like silent watchers, their branches heavy with snow. Each step crunched underfoot, the sound sharp in the cold stillness. The man led the way, his pack heavy on his shoulders. The tiny alien girl followed close, her small hand gripping his coat so she wouldn't lose him in the mist. The wind pushed against them, carrying flakes of snow that stung their faces. He kept glancing back to make sure she was keeping up. Her thin legs moved quickly, but he could see the strain in her steps. Her blanket trailed behind her like a shadow, dragging through the snow. They walked for hours, stopping only when she began to shiver too much to continue. He helped her sit on a fallen log, brushing snow from its surface. Her glowing eyes looked up at him, tired but alert. "Are they behind us?" she asked softly. He listened for a moment, the forest answering only with the creak of ice-laden branches. "Not yet," he said, though he wasn't sure. He handed her a small piece of bread from his pack. She took it in both hands, eating, slowly, savoring every bite as if it was more than just food, as if it was proof that she was still alive. "You don't eat?" she asked. He shook his head. Later, when she was done, they kept moving. The ground began to slope upward, the snow deeper here, at the top of the rise. The trees opened, and the world stretched out before them. In the far distance, faint lights glimmered a city. Her eyes widened. "Is that safe?" she asked. He didn't answer right away, staring at the lights. "Maybe," he said finally. "But if they control it, we can't stay." She lowered her gaze. "They do. They own everything." The words made his chest tighten. If there was nowhere safe on this planet, they would have to think of something else. But for now, shelter was more important than plans. They found a small cave at the base of a cliff, half hidden behind a curtain of frozen vines. Inside, it was dry and shielded from the wind. He set down his pack and began arranging a small fire. The girl sat near the wall, hugging her knees. Watching him work, when the fire was lit, warmth spread slowly through the cave. She unwrapped herself from the blanket just enough to hold her hands close to the flames. "Where will we go?" she asked. He poked at the fire with a stick. "Somewhere far enough that they can't follow." Her voice was quiet, almost as if she was afraid to break the stillness. "They always follow. They don't stop until they take what they want." He looked at her, her small face glowing faintly in the firelight. "Then we don't stop either," he said. For a while, they sat in silence. The only sound, the soft crackle of burning wood. Then she spoke again. "Before you found me, I thought I would die in that river." Her words trembled. "The ice broke. I couldn't breathe. I thought, maybe it's better." He shook his head. "No." His voice was steady. "It's better here, alive." She studied him for a long moment, then said, "When you pulled me out, I knew you were mine." He smiled faintly. "You keep saying that," she tilted her head, "because it's true, in my people's way. If someone saves your life, you belong to them, forever." He wasn't sure if it was a tradition or a law. But he could see it was more than just words to her. The firelight flickered on the walls, casting their shadows long and strange. Outside, the wind grew louder, and he could almost swear he heard something else beneath it. Faint movement in the snow. He stood, moving toward the cave entrance in the distance, beyond the trees. Small flash of light broke through the mist. It was gone in an instant, but it was enough to make him return to the fire. "We move at first light," he said. She didn't question it, only nodded. Pulling the blanket tighter around her, that night, sleep came slowly. He stayed awake, listening. Ready to wake her at the first sound of danger, she slept lightly. Her breathing soft, her small hand curled against the edge of the blanket. When morning came, the world outside the cave was coated in fresh snow. The tracks they had made the day before were gone, hidden by the night storm. It was a small gift from nature, a fresh start on a dangerous path. They stepped out into the white world once more, the cold biting but the sky clearer now. Ahead lay more forest, more uncertainty, and somewhere, far away, a place where she could be safe. He glanced down at her as they walked. Her eyes were forward, but her hand still gripped his coat. As long as she held on, he knew he would keep moving, no matter how far, no matter how long. The forest path grew narrower, branches arching above them like the ribs of some ancient creature. Snow fell softly now, settling on their shoulders and hair. The man kept his steps steady, but his mind was turning over the same thought. The way she kept saying, "You are mine," by midday. They stopped to rest near a frozen stream. The girl knelt beside the water. Cupping a handful of snow to her lips, he sat on a log, watching her small figure, her blanket wrapped around her like a shield. Her glowing eyes lifted to meet his, and she hesitated before speaking. "You don't understand the bond," she said quietly. He leaned forward. "Then tell me." She looked down at the snow in her hands, letting it melt between her fingers. "When one of my kind is saved from death, we belong to the one who saved us. It is not just a word, it is life." He frowned slightly. "Life." She nodded. "Our bodies, our hearts. They tie to the one who saved us. If we are taken away, the bond breaks, and we die." The words hung heavy in the cold air. "So, if they take you back," he began. She cut him off, her voice shaking. "I won't live. That's why they want to take me, not to keep me, but to end me, so the bond dies too." The realization sank in like a stone. This wasn't just a rescue. It wasn't just kindness. By saving her, he had tied her life too. His, she wasn't exaggerating if she was taken. It would kill her. She stepped closer, her small hands gripping his arm. "That's why I said you must be mine forever. If you leave me, I die. If you give me to them, I die." Her glowing eyes were wet now, the light in them softer, more desperate. He met her gaze, steady. "Then I'll never leave you." She blinked, and for a moment her fear eased. The faintest smile touched her lips. Not joy exactly, but a quiet relief. They ate a small meal together, sharing dried meat and bread from his pack. She sat close, their shoulders touching. If the distance of even a few inches was too much, he didn't mind. There was something in her presence that felt fragile, yet unshakable. When they moved on, the snow grew heavier, coating the world in white silence. Hours passed before they reached a ridge. From there, they could see far across the valley and far below. Dark figures moved slowly through the snow. The hunters, the girl's grip on his coat tightened. "They follow," she whispered. He nodded. "Then we go farther." The descent from the ridge was steep, the path slippery. He guided her carefully, holding her hand to keep her from falling. At one point, she slipped, and he caught her against his chest. Her small frame trembled, and she didn't move for a moment, just stayed there as if afraid the ground would swallow her. When they reached the bottom, he led her into another stretch of forest. The light was fading now, and they needed shelter again. They found a cluster of old ruins, broken walls, and collapsed roofs. Maybe from an outpost, long abandoned. Inside one of the half-standing buildings, they lit a small fire. The girl sat close, her legs tucked beneath her, staring into the flames. "If you hadn't pulled me from the river," she said softly, "I would never have felt the bond, never have known you. And if I hadn't," he replied, "I wouldn't be here now, trying to keep you alive." She tilted her head, studying him in the flickering light. "Why did you save me? You didn't know me. You could have walked away." He thought about it, about the moment he saw her under the ice, because no one should die alone. He said, "Not if I can stop it." She didn't answer, but her eyes softened for a long while. They sat in silence, the fire casting shadows across the broken walls. Outside, the snow covered their tracks again, but the hunters would not give up. That night, as they tried to sleep, she shifted closer until her head rested against his arm. Her voice was almost too soft to hear. "If I am yours, you are mine. That is how it works." He looked down at her, the firelight catching the faint glow of her mark. "Then we belong to each other," he said. She made a quiet sound, almost a sigh. And her breathing slowed. The wind outside picked up, rattling the broken stones. He stayed awake for a long time, listening, knowing that somewhere in the white darkness, the hunters were still moving, closing the distance. And as he watched her sleep, he knew something else. The bond wasn't just hers anymore. It was his too, even if it had no name in his world. The snowstorm broke in the early hours, leaving the ruins silent under a pale, cold sky. The man woke first, his breath forming clouds in the frozen air. The fire had burned down to faint embers, and the girl still slept against his arm, her face half hidden under the blanket. He moved quietly, adding wood to the fire until the warmth returned, but as the flames grew, so did the sound outside, faint, deliberate crunches in the snow. He froze, listening. The pattern was wrong for an animal. It was slow, steady, and closing in from more than one direction. He shook her gently. "Wake up." Her glowing eyes opened instantly, and she seemed to understand before he even spoke. "They're here," he said. She sat up, clutching the blanket tightly, fear flashing in her gaze. He reached for his pack and pulled out the small blaster. Its power cell was nearly full, but it wouldn't last in a long fight. He scanned the broken walls around them, looking for any advantage. The ruins had half collapsed, but parts of the structure still stood strong, and some of the old defense systems were buried in the walls, old, but maybe still functional. The sound of boots in snow grew louder. The first dark figure appeared between two broken walls, visor catching the morning light. Behind it, more shadows moved, surrounding the ruins. The leader's voice cut through the air. "Human, you have something that belongs to us." The man stepped forward, putting himself between them and the girl. "She belongs to no one," he said. His voice was calm, but his grip on the blaster was tight. The leader tilted its head. "Then you will die with her." It raised a weapon, but before it could fire, the man pressed a button on the wall beside him. A deep hum vibrated through the ruins, and a hidden turret flickered to life. A flash of energy shot from the turret, forcing the first two hunters to scatter behind cover. The man fired his blaster at the third, hitting the armor but not penetrating. The girl crouched low behind a fallen beam, her eyes wide but fixed on him. The hunters moved quickly, one flanking to the left, another to the right. The man ducked behind a wall as plasma fire scorched the stones beside his head. He returned fire, hitting one in the leg and making it stumble. The leader shouted something in their language, and suddenly two more rushed forward. He ducked as a blast hit the wall, spraying shards of stone. The girl let out a small cry, and he turned just in time to see one of the hunters closing in on her. Without thinking, he moved fast, slamming into the attacker and knocking it to the ground. They grappled in the snow, the hunter's claws scraping against his coat. He fired point blank into its chest, and it went still. But there was no time to rest. Another blast hit the ground near him, forcing him back toward the wall. The turret sparked and went silent. Its old systems burned out. That left only him, the blaster, and the broken walls for cover. The girl crawled to him, her small hands clutching his sleeve. "Don't let them take me," she whispered. He met her eyes. "They won't." One of the hunters tried to rush their position, but he fired first, dropping it into the snow. The leader, now alone with one remaining soldier, stepped forward. "You can't win, human." He steadied his aim. "I don't need to win. I just need to make sure you don't take her." For a moment, the leader hesitated. Its visor tilted toward the girl, then back to him. "This isn't over," it said. Then, with a sharp signal, the last two hunters retreated into the mist, their shapes fading between the trees. The silence after was heavy. The only sound was the girl's breathing, quick and uneven. He lowered the blaster and crouched beside her. "It's over for now," he said. She nodded slowly, but her hands didn't release his coat. He looked around at the damaged ruins, the burnt walls, and the bodies in the snow. "We can't stay here," he said. "They'll come back with more." She didn't argue, only pulled the blanket tighter and stood close to him. They gathered what little they had and stepped out into the snow. The morning light was weak, but the air felt different now. He had faced them and held his ground, and she had seen it as they walked. She glanced up at him. "You fought for me." He looked down at her, always. Her eyes softened, and for a moment, the cold didn't seem so sharp. Still, he knew the truth. The hunters weren't gone forever. They would return stronger, but so would he. Because now the fight wasn't just about survival. It was about keeping a promise. The snow was deep now, each step slow and heavy. But they didn't stop. The ruins were far behind them. Hidden by the twisting trees and the rolling mist, the man carried the pack on his back, the blaster at his side, and the tiny alien girl stayed close, her hand gripping his coat like she had since the river. The wind had softened, the forest quieter than it had been for days, but that quiet felt fragile, like it could break at any second. He kept scanning the shadows between the trees, always expecting the shape of a hunter to appear. By midday, they reached a rocky slope, and at the top a shape waited in the snow. A small shuttle, half buried under ice and frost. Its hull was scarred and faded. The kind of vessel long forgotten by anyone who once owned it. He stopped, studying it for a moment, then glanced at her. "If this works, we can leave this planet." Her glowing eyes widened. "Leave? Go far?" He nodded. "Far enough they can't follow." They climbed the slope together, their boots slipping on patches of frozen rock at the shuttle's hatch. He wiped away a layer of ice from the control panel and tried the release. At first, it stayed locked, but after a few tries and a burst of stubborn force, it hissed open. Inside, the air was stale and cold, but the systems were still there. He moved to the cockpit, running his hands over the controls. The power core lights flickered, faint but alive. "It might work," he said. She stepped in behind him, still holding the blanket around her shoulders. Her gaze wandered over the small space, touching every sea, every detail, like she was trying to believe it was real. "This could be home?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "If it flies, yes." It took hours to bring the shuttle back to life. He rerouted power, cleared ice from the intake vents, and checked the fuel reserves. She stayed close, sometimes handing him tools, sometimes just sitting near the door, watching the snow outside like it might turn into hunters at any moment. When the engines finally hummed to life, the sound was like a heartbeat returning. The shuttle vibrated under their feet, warm air beginning to fill the cabin. She looked at him with something between awe and relief. "We can go." He nodded. "We can go." She didn't smile big, but her shoulders lowered, the tension easing from her frame for the first time since he had found her. They strapped in, and as he guided the shuttle off the frozen ground, the trees fell away. Beneath them, the world below shrank, the river winding like a silver scar through the white. The higher they rose, the more the sky shifted from pale gray to deep black. Dotted with stars, she pressed her small hand to the window, staring at the endless space beyond. "It's beautiful," she whispered. He glanced at her. "Better than the river, right?" She turned toward him, and for the first time, she gave him a true smile, soft and warm. "Better." Hours passed as they drifted beyond the planet's pull. He set the course toward a system far from any known patrol routes. The hum of the engines filled the quiet, steady and comforting. At some point, she unstrapped and moved to sit beside him, curling up in the co-pilot's seat. Her glowing eyes studied his face in the dim light. "You kept your promise," she said. He met her gaze. "And I will keep it, always." She tilted her head. "In my people's way, when someone says that, it means they are bound not just in life, but in heart, forever." He didn't answer right away, just let the meaning sink in. Then he nodded slowly. "Then I guess I am bound." She reached out, her small fingers resting over his hand on the control panel. "And I am bound to you," she said. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything they had survived together. They flew on, leaving the cold world behind. The stars stretched out before them, endless and bright. He didn't know what waited ahead. More dangers, new worlds, maybe even more people who would try to take her, but none of it mattered. She leaned her head against his arm, her voice barely more than a breath. "Now you are truly mine," he smiled, keeping his eyes on the stars. "And you're mine." For the first time since he had pulled her from the river, the fear in her eyes was gone, replaced by something stronger, trust. And as the shuttle slipped deeper into the darkness between worlds, he knew one truth that would never change. He hadn't just saved her life, she had become part of his, and nothing in the galaxy would take that away.